I don't know why I got to go through this every week though. Like
I know it's very frustrating.
but it's completely counterintuitive too. I mean, I'd like to think that I'm not completely incompetent.
You're not.
Well, hard to prove that one now.
No.
All right. Well, I know how to do art, so hopefully we're good.
Yeah, you got
That's the purpose of what we're doing here. So,
right.
all right, what I make up for in art, I'll fall short in tech. I don't know. It's ridiculous though. Now, sometimes I don't the fighting between YouTube and Zoom over the cameras. That's sometimes not even an issue. But I still had trouble with YouTube for some reason. Anyway, belly aching over. I found my scale through these abstract shapes. I found this kind of flat plane that I like to use for finding the tilt of the head. So she's at like 3/4, but she doesn't have a head tilt. It's only a head turn. Um, and so nothing I'm using so far is anything that I'm establishing as right or anything more than a mere suggestion. Because I could go a path of measuring everything and being very precise, but I don't really like that. It takes too long to get going. Sometimes the measurements fail you and you trust them too much. And I like this kind of intuitive sense to where I can really have a kind of dialogue with the painting, and that's the way I prefer. Again, we could slow this way down. I could measure everything. I could do a very rigid schematic to where the the initial lines are set in stone and I have to follow them. But again, it's kind of a little bit freer right now. I don't have anything to protect, and I can look at simple relationships of shapes. And I don't know. I like to capture the uniqueness of the person. I don't want to have a generic version that I then have to breathe the likeness into later. So that's where it is right now. Very simple shapes, establishing a height to width relationship. I am changing the photo ever so slightly because there's some things I like about it, some things that I'd prefer different. You're gonna say something, Liz?
Yeah, I was just going to say your board is not, I mean, I could see it, but it's not totally in the, oh, there. Now that's much better.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I bumped it because my one of my painting cases fell on the chair, and
Yeah, that's better now.
yeah,
Thanks.
thanks. Thanks for telling me. All right, I'll be talking about the process. I'll be talking about what I think is going wrong during the pose or during the sitting. There's no pose; it's a photo. Um, but yeah, you can ask me questions about this, and it doesn't have to be art. We could just chit chat. That's fine too. So this is on Facebook or YouTube Live. The audio on Zoom won't be there, but if anybody has a problem with that, I'll just scrub the audio from the live feed. I'm gonna dub over it anyway and speed it all up and talk about the process anyway. So anyway, so I'm building this. I don't want to settle for a composition I don't like. So right now, this shoulder is going to be awfully close to the edge, but I don't really mind that. Um, and this has plenty of time to work some things out. So if I did mind that, then now would be the time to change it. But again, I don't really care about that so much. I'm treating everything as pretty abstract. Sometimes I go really fast through these stages and sometimes really slow and meticulous. Like, I'm not wed to any one technique. I tend to like abstract shapes over sort of mannequin schematic shapes, but I do like a loose schematic of what Loomis likes to do. He likes the straight center line of the skull. Keeps it really simple, usually thirds between the hairline and the brow. That's where the supraorbital ridge is. And then another third to the bottom of the nose, the styloid process, and then another third to the bottom of the nose. But, you know, that's even more mannequin than I like to go. I like to go to an abstract version of the real shapes that I see rather than theoretical you know, schematic shapes, theoretical portrait shapes. I want it to be this model, not some model. And I want it to be this light, not some light. And the light is, to me, more important than, you know, eyes, ears, nose, mouth. Obviously, having a decent simplified skull in there is important to me. But I don't want to be so wed to anatomical shapes that I miss what's actually there. And so that's the purpose of abstraction. It's not abstract like fauvism, it's abstract like the real shapes that I see, but just not the named preconceived notions of what I think I see, like, again, eyes, ears, nose, mouth. So right now, I want to just squint and design shadows. I'm going to be adjusting as I go. Nothing is right. Everything's just a suggestion. And as I work these abstract shapes in, I'm going to be looking for a pattern. And if that pattern doesn't work, then it just needs a small adjustment. But that's the beauty of this, is I don't expect anything to be right, and I don't have to protect anything. So if I had a detailed eye, what is that sound? If I had a detailed sound, if I had a detailed shape, I'd want to protect it. I would try to wrangle the entire portrait to make it work, or I would have to move this thing that I worked really hard to establish, or I would just leave this egregious error because I'm not willing to move that thing that's wrong. And if I can treat this in the abstract, I don't even have to think in terms of right, wrong. I just have to think of things as kind of loose suggestions that get me somewhat close. So that center line is going to be an issue soon. It's going to be a distraction rather than a help. The center line just says that the skull has a sense of symmetry, and I can base all of my features on that skull tilt. And as soon as that line gets to be a burden, it's gone. Again, because it will have already done its job. And so you can see that I'm not drawing feature shapes. I'm drawing shapes of shadows for this very simple scheme that I have. And sometimes I put features in. This time I'm not, because I'm not wed to any one technique. But I do like a simple to specific, abstract to real approach. So that's what I'm doing right now. So the shapes that I'm doing aren't necessarily shadow and light. The hair, even in the light, is really dark, so it became a dark. And the ear is in shadow, so the ear is part of that dark. The neck is part of that shadow, so it's just a very simple block in. And you can see that if I cut this out of you know, construction paper, yeah, it wouldn't look like a face or anything. I mean, maybe you could guess face over any other shape, but it's definitely not some of the things that we associate with a face. And I don't want that kind of distraction early on. Not for this one. Again, I can do different approaches. The mouth is the upper lip is a dark, and it has a space to this other dark. So if I put I'm sorry, what?
I'm sorry about that. I was trying to turn my phone off with a voice command.
Oh, okay, no problem. Yeah, I was wondering what that noise was, but yeah, I don't want to say that as it was a problem. It wasn't. Anyway, what I was saying is, if I put labels on it like mouth, then I might get into this trap of trying to make it a mouth. And if I try to make it a mouth, then I might get mired into what I think a mouth looks like rather than the real collection of shapes that I see. Because I might want to change this around a lot. I don't really need to find the light side of the nose. In fact, that's where the center line of the skull is starting to be a burden, because that thickness of the line already goes past where the shape of light is. And so that looked like my balance of abstract shapes was really skewed to me. I mean, there's not a whole lot of information. So the marks that I make more sense to me than they will to anybody. But like I said, as soon as that middle skull line gets to be a burden, then it's gone. It served its purpose, and you know, I'm not gonna let it get in the way of what I want to see. So really super simple shapes. I'm not painting an eye right now. There's a shape of dark that I want to try to capture based on that skull tilt. And so just helps me make decisions if I have this pattern of light and dark that everything has to fit like a jigsaw puzzle. Like I can see that as a problem. So every time I come across a roadblock of this pattern not working, I can ask myself, well, is it because this shape of dark is too high or that shape of dark too low? And, you know, coincidentally, that shape refers to the eye, but in the next case, it might not. It might just simply be a shadow, or in this case, a brow, or in another case, something else. So I'm just wrangling around abstract shapes until I like that pattern, and then it's going to become 5 values. And so with just a simple ball, I'm going to be getting, oh no, actually I skipped a step. The next step is just do abstract simplification. So right now I'm just kind of doing an abstraction, but it's really just kind of like the line work in simple shapes. Sometimes I go more geometric. These are more true to the abstract shapes that I see. And again, I'm not wed to any one way. Sometimes I would just put like an oval here representing the eye socket, or like the ball of the nose. I might track that as being to the right of that center line. And sometimes that's a nice approach.
Did you get snow?
No, it's just real slushy stuff. It's not. It was a little slippery getting home too. So yeah, I had the choice of staying at the school, but I already did that on Friday night. But good news, all the Christmas stuff is gone.
Wow,
Yeah, how about that?
that's amazing.
So
That's a huge job.
it was, but it's getting a little far out of Christmas, so it has to be done.
I know.
It was fun though. I mean, and the boys loved it. So
It was fantastic, I thought. The studio looks so nice.
Well,
Everything's really nice.
we have gone a lot more elaborate than that, but I thought that was appropriate. We had a lot less people than usual, so.
But for me, it was the most elaborate because that was,
Because it was your first.
no. Last year it was different.
Yeah, it's different every year. Yeah, it's just like this painting. It's not going to follow a rigid template. It's going to be a little bit more felt. And so I don't want to rush this stage. I mean, the temptation is to rush this stage. This is just a bad idea to rush this stage. Because right now I do, especially for demo purposes, I want to get into, a soft detailed eye. I want to get into these rich middle tones. I want to get into turning grays. I want to do all these things. But if I rush this stage, I might have to do a lot of fixing. And so I don't want to do any fixing. All I want to do is elaborate. If I can get this stage right, then it becomes the foundation for the next round of shapes, which gets a little bit more specific. And what I also want to do is stop and reflect. So if I was doing this in a really measure heavy system, then yeah, maybe I don't have to do a whole lot of correction. Maybe it's going to be more of more measurement, more measurement, more measurement. So the reason I don't like that so much is because sometimes I take bad measurements and I don't want to trust those bad measurements. I want to have a foundation that I can just really feel that the shapes kind of coalesce. But also too is it would be just a really slow approach, and sometimes you miss out on some of the suggestions that the painting itself suggests. And so I like to have the painting have its own voice. I like it to just help me see some things that maybe I didn't anticipate, like the overall scale of the portrait to the background. Well, at this stage, I can make any changes that I want. I'm not wed to this size and this composition. And if there was a better way that maybe I thought this was the right course, but now that I see it, I changed my mind, or maybe I can see now at this stage that it's not doing what I was hoping, then I wouldn't settle for this. I would wrangle it around or start over. And so I like to have the painting have its voice in the creative process. And the other thing too is, if you're going to do it this way, then you really need to be able to stop and make some adjustments, because it's almost never going to be right. In fact, at best, this is too simple, so it just can't be right. And so you're going to stop, you're going to make an assessment at this stage that it's just super easy to make adjustments, because we're not wed to any shapes. Nothing is so specific that it has to be protected. There's no detail. There's no soft edges. There's no protected shapes, like I said earlier, with eyes. Eyes in particular. I mean, people get really protective of their eyes when they put those in. But also too is we have a really good way of measuring that. We have this like great opportunity to say that with just simple light and dark, there's this jigsaw puzzle of shapes within the outside border. So either these shapes of dark fit within this outside border with the shapes of light, or they don't. And so that's one major way I like to measure. The other ways are going to be proportion measurements and plumb lines. So plumb lines you can check really at any stage of the painting, but right now is the best time for proportion measurements, because they're still the small, big shapes. The small, specific shapes are rife with error. If you're using eye sizes, if that eye is just a little, if your measurement for that eye is just a little off, you're taking bad measurements. And then the tendency is to trust those bad measurements over what your eye is telling you is right and wrong. So I'd much rather have my eye tell me right and wrong, and I'd rather use proportion measurements when it's the big shapes, not the tiny little nitpicky shapes. So what's the halfway point? Is it the inside corner of the eye? Well, this is saying we're really close, which makes sense because of the volume of the hair. And then I can do that same measurement on my photo or model and say, yep, I nailed it. So I'd move on. So this shape of the outside contour to the shadow in the eye socket equals from the chin to the bottom of the eyelid. Is that true? And I can just take a really quick check using very flat measurements, and that says that the height either needs to be longer or the width a little bit narrower. And I don't want to make a snap judgment So it's saying that if I take this width, it ought to get me, okay, well, there's your bad measurement again. So that second measurement actually checked out right. And that's where, again, I'd rather trust my eye over measurement. So I had to do that double check to just confirm it, because if my measurement is just a tiny bit off, then I'll trust the measurement over my eye. And I've spent a very long time developing my eye, and that comes with some growing pains. So your ability to estimate gets a lot better over time. And the more beholden to measurements you are, I don't want to put everybody in a box, but I've seen it a lot where you can make really bad decisions based on measurements because you think somehow because you took the measurement, it's automatically right. And that's just not true. Measurements can be rife with human error. I did bother to learn sight size, which is doesn't have to be a measuring system, but it's used as a measuring system to where everything's kind of just transferred over from a viewpoint. I don't have anything negative to say about it, but it can be hard to take a leery look at your measurement and say, okay, I better trust my eye on this one. Or, you know, I learned it from Dan Graves, and Dan Graves was saying is you never take just one measurement. You say everything that you measure, you want to double check, and then maybe even triple check if that doesn't go right. So again, I don't have anything bad to say about sight size. I like it. I teach it. I don't really use it, but I have a lot of respect for it and the artists that use it. I've never had a convert, having said that. All right, so right now with that jigsaw puzzle idea, I feel like her width isn't quite enough. And so my first impression said, check the width. So at a landmark, I have that corner of the eye, which takes me from the zygomatic bone all the way to the ear. Well, that same measurement, considering a flat measurement for my flat board, gets me not a great landmark from the bottom of the head, but it gives me a good landmark from the top of the head. So from here to here ought to equal from here to here, which is spot on, which just tells me that my height to width measurement is okay, but my maybe I could expand out the cheek a little bit, because this jigsaw puzzle piece didn't fit. And again, I'm taking my time here. I could go a lot faster, but this is the time to be little slow. Little slow is okay. So I don't really have any adherence to light. I did put a second shape in here. That's really going to get eliminated in the midtones. So you have to be willing to lose some of these shadings if you're doing it my way, or you know, my way is so fluid. But if you're doing it this way, sometimes you just want to see the shape. So if I lighten this little pocket here that at the Schuler School we call eye sausage, and that's not my term, that was given to me by another artist. But yeah, that just like this little egg pillow fits right there between the brow and the upper eyelid. It's just a really great shape to say, does that shape fit? And then maybe I just want to track that there's a darker dark in here. Let's call it something radical. We'll call it hair. But it, you know, again, it doesn't have to be hair. It's just an abstract shape. And the more we label things, the more we can kind of get wed into preconceived notions that can take us away from what's really there. And do I like that negative space to the edge? Do I like that negative space from the edge of the hair to the shadow? And pretty close. I mean, within a give or take, I think I could go a little bit wider. And then she has a tight bun, but with her 3/4 view, it doesn't show up very well. So I'm going to make the conscious effort of expanding that. Now, you have two courses of action. You could change that later and just do verbatim what the photo is telling you or the model, and then change it later, because everything can be a measuring tool. In this case, that's not much of a measuring tool, so I'm just going to go ahead and put it in. But for the most part, if I can just take a quick glance at the photo and then a quick glance at the painting and go one-to-one, that's easier sometimes. So sometimes you don't want to make the creative changes until later, because you have this opportunity to compare real shapes based on the model or the photo. And, the harshness in here just doesn't matter yet. In fact, I will say over and over and over again, if you study with me, that I care less about style this early on. I care more about clarity. So even if my clarity looks really rough or plainer or, choppy, it may not have any elegance yet, but it gets me an advantage in that I don't waste any time. I don't hesitate to make the changes that I need to make. And, I don't protect anything. There's nothing to protect yet. And so, again, I'm quite willing to draw something in and then lose it because it's part of this network of darks rather than this network of lights. Anyway, okay, I love this start. It could be refined further. Some people do a very elaborate underpainting. Some people do even less than me. And sometimes I do even less than this. So let's not even say that there's a true right way to do this stage, but it just simply gives me some landmarks to measure and some landmarks to just feel like I'm doing a very simple abstract start that I can clarify with the next round, which is going to be abstract relationships of color and color and atmosphere and all these things. So it's just like we could either say that small specific parts are important, or we can just say everything is important early on. I'm going to let everything be important right now, and then I'll hone in on where I want the eye to go, which is going to be the eyes in a portrait almost every time. It's not necessarily true, but it's almost always true. And so I like these little abstract relationships. I'm not wed to anything, and I don't have very tricky things like these middle grays or reflected lights. Reflected lights can really throw you off if you're trying to make them happen too early because they're part of that network of shadow. They're not part of the light. The direct light is bouncing its light into the shadow off of something else. And I want to treat the two categories of light and shadow. I almost always include reflected light as the shadow. And I'm ready to start blocking in big color blocks. But first, I don't like this little triangle. There's a little keystone right here, the glabella, and that just wasn't working. So I was able to catch that on an early stage and make the adjustment that I want to make. I think that's going to help me in a lot of ways, but I'm going to bring the shadow over because I need enough space in here. And that idea of a jigsaw puzzle helped me see something that I didn't see right away. And in this further evaluation, yeah, that really helps. So again, the earlier you can catch these things when it's very simple and abstract, the better. And does that make me change anything else? Again, I already like my height to width relationship, but I am willing to change it if in case I took a bad measurement or if I just feel like it, right? So sometimes with enough experience, you can just say, okay, this is going to be better for my painting, even if it measured right. Either the measurement was wrong or it feels like it should do something differently. So yeah, I like that a lot better. And it was all based that I just didn't see this little light space here called glabella. Literally means bald spot. That's an anatomy term, but it's there on the abstract too. It just helps when your anatomy gets good enough that it's just part of the way you see. And it's not a paralyzing like technical mess of tiny shapes and connections and you know, you're not kind of paralyzed by a million different names of bones and muscles. It's just part of the way you see. And that takes a long time. So we have a lot of people that, you know, come in with maybe medical anatomy, but they still struggle to apply it to painting because it's just a different way. And so just naming the bones and muscles doesn't quite do it. So there's some things that I would change on the small shapes, but I'm not worried about that yet. Because in fact, a lot of technical things I'm going to lose early on. So getting this soft and refined, it might help me feel more confident that it's right, but small shape right, not big abstract right. And I want to keep things really big and abstract right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and treat this dark as dark enough for now. I want to make my turning shadows and cast shadows darker than I have, but I'm going to go ahead and go into a big color block in. And I like to do pretty flat shapes early on. If I'm going to guess at the middle tone, I'm going to be too dark and too colorful. So she has a fairly cool light source. There are some areas of decent color, but I would rather overdo it than underdo it, and I'd rather have it too dark than too light. And so a lot of times we can plug it into an equation of, if I were going to err, I want to err on the side of ... And in this case, that's pretty rich, probably richer than I want to go in most areas, and I think I could actually darken it a little bit. So that's really rich. Probably a little over the top, but again, I'm erring on the side of too dark and too rich. And I'm not being very discriminate over these little shifts because I don't really have to be. I'm treating this as abstract. And what I saw presenting itself before just gets a little bit more informed. And so I'm going to be seeing little shifts to make based on how things fit together. So right now it's either the light or it's the shadow or something inherently dark like the iris and hair or upper lip, you know, lower lip for that matter too. And it's just very simple decision making because it's not very specific landmarks. It's not tiny little highlights. It's not little difficult to establish reflected lights without, you know, broad context. And so this skin tone is, I don't even like to use this term skin tone because it's just a middle tone block in, but it's over the top. It's way too dark and it's way too, you know, rich in color. But when I add highlights, it's going to get desaturated. When I add turning grays, it's going to get desaturated. And like I said, I'm just kind of in a discovery process right now. And sometimes I've found, even though I'm calling this over the top and garish and too dark, when I put in my highlights, that's going to desaturate the color. When I put in my turning grays, that's going to desaturate the color. When I put an atmosphere in, that's going to change the context in which I see this color. And so I'm going to almost guarantee that it's too rich in most areas, but I might be surprised by where the modifications are when I build more context and understand it better. And a lot of times when we're in a really bright ground like white, this, you know, when you put something down and it looks terribly dark, this would look very dark against white. And sometimes you just get so nervous to go into a stage like this that you'd make it too bright, you'd make it washed out, you'd have almost no value range to add highlight. And so you'll start brightening up your middle tone that's already too bright. And when you do that, you just run out of value. So now your skin tone will be dead, like dead. Because you're using all these like whites to brighten it, or it'll be like jaundice because like you're adding all these bright yellows to brighten it. And so in both scenarios, I think it gets a very consistent problem with portrait of being very washed out, and then you have to breathe life into it, swimming in paint, which, I do a fine job handling thick paint. That's not it. It's just, um, again, which side would I rather err on? I'd rather err on too dark and too rich in color, and then I'll desaturate with 5 values. So the 5 values are highlight within the light, turning shadows, reflected light, cast shadows. Then I want a transition value in between light and shadow, which is usually a gray. So if you hear the term optical gray, that's an old master trick. They had very limited choices of their colors, especially the poorer artists like Hals and Rembrandt and a whole lot of other artists. But they could only afford so much, and the earth tones were the cheapest and most accessible pigments, so they made their earth tones very exciting with turning grays, like these really muted gray colors that make their relatively dull colors pop. And so love that trick, and I want to use it on this. I don't quite know what I want to do style-wise yet. Again, the painting is going to suggest it. My operating theory is to just loosely suggest the body here. This is definitely going to be more about the face. So once I get the face more established, I'll know exactly what to do for filling a 3-ish hour alla prima. If I had forever, maybe I'd map it out a little bit more. I'd plan it. I'd know, I'm developing the whole thing, or maybe it's a client that I want to suggest. They want a very finished approach or a very choppy approach or something like that. I'd have that dialogue with them. And so we're getting, I'm going to get the background of my photo is actually pretty similar to this green gray that I have. So I might just leave that for now. But again, very stark, very oversaturated, pretty dark middle tone for the light source on her. And I'm very comfortable with this not looking right yet. And that's something that really affects especially beginners, is that they want it to look right. They want it to look accurate. They want it to look like this model. I'm not in the least concerned about that. I'm concerned about it looking like this pattern of abstract shapes when I squint my eyes, and the harshness doesn't bother me at all. So I'm going to cool down the skin tone. So I'm going to warm up the turning shadow. I'm going to add some sienna into some raw umber and make it more like a burnt umber. And if I'm this dark with this shadow, then I've got a lot of wiggle room for turning this saturated mid-tone with a lot of gray. I'll see if I want to lighten up the reflected light. I'm leaning that way right now. Sometimes I can leave it alone as the initial start, and sometimes I need to brighten it. Sometimes I need to darken it, but I usually err on the side of too dark. If I had to err in any one direction, it would be too dark, and then I'd happily brighten it up if I need to. So again, that reflected light in the jawline, in the cheek, in the bottom of the nose, in the inside of the eye socket, in the temple, those are all shapes that I'm going to put in when I get more context. I'm going to go pretty dark with the hair. I don't really care what color it is because it's just really super dark. I'm going to be adding some gray from the atmosphere into it. And again, just a really blocky, simple start. And I'm not worried about a thing because I've been through this rodeo many times. This can be a kind of a nerve-wracking moment for a student because a lot of these shapes don't look like the finished product yet. They're again, what I see when I squint. And then extra considerations for how I like to paint. If I'm going to err in one way or the other, it's going to be too dark and too rich in color. So Yeah, I like where it's going. I think the highlights are going to read beautifully against this. And like I said, this is cooler light. I can add white into my mid-tone color, maybe even a little touch of blue in there, and it shows up beautifully without being pure white. So I have not only not totally killed the color with keying it up too bright and adding a ton of white to brighten most of the skin tone, but also too is I don't have to go to pure white, which is just dead in color, and I don't have to key it up to my brightest light yet. If I needed to go brighter, I could definitely do that. Okay, so Sandra, hi, and hi, Claude. The skin tone I was using, it's mostly yellow ochre. I added some cad red into it and some burnt sienna, and then there's some white because it, I don't want it to be too rich in color, but I wanted it a little exaggerated. So again, I'm going to be graying a lot of this color down. Now that I have an establishment of some highlight values, I can be over generous with this. Again, I haven't gone to pure white, and some of the minor highlights can be put in equally with some of the greater highlights. I'm just categorizing right now. And again, the roughness is going to go away as I get more information to work with. And so when you just think about color, pigments like raw umber, burnt sienna, and yellow ochre, your earth tones, those are all three primaries as tertiary color. So it's just a really great way of adding into these richer colors. If I get a tertiary in there, it's going to be really subdued color. And so like these transition values in here, I'm desaturating that kind of over the top skin tone. I've desaturated with the bright highlights. In between, maybe the skin tone will work. And I say maybe because who knows, right? I'm building information to play with, and I'm quite willing to change anything because I haven't fussed with it so much. I don't have anything to protect yet. And you'll see this in my still lives too. Sometimes I'll go a little bit more aggressive with the initial abstraction just because a lot of times still life doesn't have as many rules. Like if my pear is a little different in shape, well, pears can have a lot of different shapes, onions and lemons and stuff like that. Vases ought to have symmetry, but does anybody really know the width to height relationship of this specific vase or thickness of this book? Well, no, they don't. So portrait needs to have a pretty decent skull in there. And so it makes it just a little bit of extra consideration. If this were a portrait, then I'd really want to get that likeness. And so maybe slowing it down just a little bit more than some of my still lives is a good idea. And I don't know. I could definitely be more aggressive than this. I've got a pretty decent base in here from my estimate of just painting for so many years that like this stage feels really comfortable to me. And as I build in these shapes, if this stage goes well, then I can be pretty aggressive with the small brushwork that's going to pull it together and make it a soft, subtle portrait, maybe a little bit of detail where I want the focal point to go, and maybe even more than that if I decide that's the style that I want for this painting. I have an idea of this painting being a little refined in here and then getting more abstract as it goes out, but we'll see. And so now that I'm getting notes, each new note can be just a little bit more specific. I can fit it into okay, if this area needs to be brighter, then what is the story of the light? So the story of the light is going to cool down the colors as they get brighter and then warm them up as they get closer to shadow. And then it's just going to get a glance of light. So it's going to turn a little gray. And so the story of the light informs color as well as value. And in the beginning, I was only really considering value. It was just either light or dark. But now I'm considering color value, which is a little bit more complicated. It's both simultaneously, because you just can't have color without value. You can have value without color, but you can't have color without value. So you could get really great colors that totally botch the value range, and that kills your three-dimensional form. And that would be a violation of the story of the light. And so I'm already considering the story of the light. We're cooling down the light with a cool light source. We're cooling down the skin tone with a cool light source. And getting warmer as that light gets weaker, and then getting grayer as it turns away from us, because then we're in very low light. And even if we're plugging it into warm light, cool shadow, low light is not going to be rich. It's going to be gray. So I'm going to use chroma as another vehicle for getting contrast. So if my rich chromas are in a certain range consistently, and then my weaker chromas are in response to that, serving as contrast to it, then I'm going to have a dynamic portrait that's got multiple venues for contrast. I missed a little point right here, and that's okay, because I'm kind of thin with paint right now. I can definitely handle thick paint. I'm going a little bit softer, more delicate, just because it's a portrait, and I don't want it to be super heavy until I really specifically want impastos, which I definitely want to get to. I just want them to be very strategically placed. And impastos can be a great way, thick paint, just kind of globs of thick paint. They can really help project forward and create that extra little three-dimensional volume. The thing is like, if they're everywhere, they're not special. And if they're everywhere, they might end up looking a little heavy for maybe a delicate subject. Like a female face. I mean, you can definitely go rougher with females. You can go more delicate with males. I mean, it's not so much a typecast, but this portrait in particular is kind of delicate. So I'll treat it that way. Like, I've seen a lot of artists do really rough flowers, and it just doesn't capture the light floralness of it, So sometimes the heaviness of the paint supports the subject, and sometimes it doesn't. In this case, I would say I want to be pretty delicate with the paint for most areas, and then really chunk it up where I want to add a kind of a exclamation point. All right, so no soft edges per se, not yet. Maybe that's a soft edge there, but nothing like too laborious. And I'm just building by dancing around the composition. I'm not perfecting any one spot. I'm building globally, not specifically. So if I just developed one focal point and worked my way out, a lot of artists do that very effectively. But sometimes you can get one area that's just looking great, but it's inharmonious with the rest of the painting. So when I'm building like this, I'm taking notes as to how everything reacts to everything. That's what makes it a global approach. And again, I'm not here to say anybody's approach is wrong or inefficient or anything. It's just I have my natural way of doing it, and I certainly am open to students doing it different than mine, as long as we can get those fundamentals in there, like decent anatomy, decent story of the light hitting volume, decent amount of drama, and by that, you don't have to go terribly dramatic to pull that off. It just needs to be able to read from across the room where a viewer would appreciate it. And so everyone can have their voice in art if you let them. Some ateliers and things like that are kind of like, you must paint like me, or you must follow this rigid, set approach. So far, all of my brushstrokes have been done with a number 4 Filbert Bristol. So for a painting like this, it's not a huge brush, but it's not tiny either. This just doesn't allow me to do super fine brushstrokes, and that's a good thing for tempering that that sort of siren call for detail. Details just we're not ready for that yet. All right, so I've been working on the light for a long time. I might just shift to the shadows just for a little while, and then I'll start, making fine choices. So right now, all this is still kind of in the abstract. In that each new shape is going to refine it further. It's going to get more and more, not necessarily more and more portrait. It does that, but more and more her in this light. And so that's an important aspect of it. It's not a generic human. It's a person that has a very specific light source. I hear things all the time like, well, what's your formula for skin tone? Perfectly reasonable question. But the short answer is I don't have one, because if you put the same person in a different light source, their skin tone is going to be radically different. If you consider that everybody's going to have a uniqueness to them, then that will violate that sort of canned answer for skin tone. Now I realize what you were asking before, Sandra, was your what did you mix for this painting? So definitely not pointing any fingers. It's just this was just a sort of a custom idea for a very specific painting, and I would even say further than that I might mix a different color if I started this over again. This same portrait, same light, same audience, it'd probably follow a slightly different pathway, just because this is more of an organic, feel-based approach, based on a lot of fundamentals that are kind of embedded in my head as I look at simple abstract shapes that get developed into those 5 aspects of light, with highlight, glancing light, turning shadow, reflected light, cast shadow, and then it becomes hopefully her, and I can problem solve if it doesn't. I might go a little bit more vibrant with the reflected light than what I see in the photo. And I'm looking at these early choices, and that's making that sort of suggestion. Again, the painting talks to me. Hopefully, that doesn't sound like I'm schizophrenic, but the things pop up in a painting that may not have been a preconceived notion. And so I like to listen to the painting and look for a creative direction that the painting can inspire. All right, so the eyes are super heavy right now because it's just because that's the area that I've focused on the least. I'm not saying that you shouldn't focus on the eyes early. It's just that you can get, oh my gosh, this camera dripped. You can get yourself in trouble sometimes with, I don't like the symmetry of the jawline. You can get yourself in trouble sometimes of getting eyes that are just, they become sacred, and I don't want that. A lot of times I'd rather get the socket, because that's a big shape, than the eye itself, which are small specific shapes. And then once I'm in context, then my decision making for the eyes are going to be much more informed. And like I said, this is going to look a little weird for a little while, and I'm very used to this stage. I feel like I've been yammering. We can talk about anything, really. You all should check out the live I did last night.
You did a live last night?
Yeah, YouTube actually worked pretty well. Yeah, you were with me.
Oh, okay.
The figure.
Yeah. I thought you meant something else. I'm like, wow, I missed something.
No, that was crazy. So I did a 5-foot painting alla prima. It's not going to be an alla prima by the end product because we're going to get a second sitting with the model, but that was a lot of ground to cover in a small amount of time.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy. It was it went pretty well. I mean, it's not her likeness. I'll work on that on the next sitting. But I'm pleased enough with it. The camera couldn't. Well, okay. I'm not gonna blame it on the camera. I'm gonna blame it on the cameraman. That's me. I couldn't get the camera to not distort the figure. So for the most part, the lower body looks tiny on the camera, and I don't think that's the case in the real painting, but. All right, so I'm not going to do any eyelashes or anything. I'm just getting structure in place, and they're all abstract shapes. So I'm quite willing to change any of these, but again, it's just a missing aspect. It's a pretty important one, and I'm going to get a lot more specific with the eye later. I'm just not ready for that. I'm going to also get a little bit more inventive with the color. Sometimes I start very garish with color, and that's pretty exciting to me, especially when some of those colors are a little inventive. They're not, straightforward colors. I'm treating this one a little bit more conservatively than usual. Liz knows. Sometimes my starts are outright crazy, but I like to be a little diverse. Keeps it interesting. This model's wearing pretty heavy makeup. Which cuts back on a little bit of the roundness of the eye. And I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to develop a little bit of a flash of flesh on the lower eyelid, and then put the lashes a little below that. I'm just going to undo a little bit of the makeup. All that can wait till later. I'm just telling you, I have an idea in mind that's going to go a little bit different than the photo. But I'm just about done with the eye for now, and on this very simple stage. It's just a placeholder. When you're working from a live model, And I'm going to treat this somewhat like that. You really want to be able to bounce back and forth between the eyes as a pair. You're going to find that the model is going to be looking in a different direction. You might change the, you might have one eye looking in a different direction than the other by the time you block it in. And it's also just good to work symmetrical pairs anyway. Like, it's just a good strategy for a vase. You're going to work on one side and then the other, and then back to the other side, and then back to the other. It's just a really good strategy. You get the whole thing working harmoniously. And again, that sort of global approach rather than specific. So if I got this eye perfect, but then it didn't really read well with the other eye, now I'd have a lot of fixing to do, and I'd be fixing specific shapes rather than generic shapes. So I'd rather get this generic shape, leave it, work on this generic shape, leave that, work on some other areas, and now I've got a fresh eye, no pun intended, fresh eye for the eyes. I'm going to be coming in without all this sort of burden of eye fatigue, where I've been staring at these shapes and kind of mired in kind of built up observations rather than fresh observations where I can see these real relationships unfold. Pretty soon, it'd probably be a good idea to physically step back from this. I'm still approaching it with that idea of squinting and abstracting, but nothing beats getting back from your work. I've got a huge mirror behind me, so I can check it in the mirror too. Like, I can see an imbalance in the jawline. I'm not worried about it, but I know it's going to be on my agenda for things to change. I could also look in the video camera. So even if you're not doing recordings and live demonstrations, then you can still get out your cell phone and put the entire painting in this tiny little screen. You don't have to take the image, but it tells you what it looks like from that sort of whole painting approach, rather than a collection of small independent parts that may or may not coalesce the right way. And that's that step back. That's getting away from the painting, getting a fresh eye, and I highly recommend it. It's such a good thing. But don't let those alternative strategies get you away from actually physically taking a break and stepping back from your work. Again, that idea of eye fatigue. It's a natural thing to have happened. So again, very simple eyes, very structural approach. I'm going to start whittling things down. I'm going to address these areas that are a little bit more incomplete than in here, and then I'm going to come back. I'm going to get some really big choppy brush strokes for here based on how they look relative to this, arguably more important area. But important doesn't sound quite right. These supportive areas are really helpful for this. There's just simple contrasts that, the background and the neck and the upper body, that can really make this enhanced if it's supporting it well. It could be a huge distraction if it's not, and then it hurt the painting rather than helped it. And so, for both reasons, I want to address it before I get past this idea of abstraction. And the 5 values. And so it went from a very very generic shapes to, is it middle tone? Is it those sort of glancing areas? Is it highlight? Is it turning shadow? Is it reflected light? Is it cast shadow? And if it's in one of those 5 categories, they have characteristics that I can see. It's like, is this doing the right thing based on what kind of category it's in? So highlights are where the light is really just perfectly, this rounded form is perfectly angled toward the light, It's just gleaming off of there. And then everything else is glancing if it's in the light. And so the parts of the glancing lights that are close to the highlight, well, those are really bright, and in this case, a little cooler grayer based on the color of the light. And the areas right before it transitions into shadow might be where I get some rich warm. So where I started with that garish midtone, that's where I can leave it behind. That's going to be part of my strategy. And then so I'm building around those areas, and each becomes an easy problem solve because it has its characteristics in the 5 values. That's way too bright. Whoa. That was almost pure white, and that was a mistake. Well, okay. Let me clarify that. It's not a mistake because it's still in this early stage where it looked like a fish out of water and it didn't belong, and I was able to recognize it before it became a problem. So not a mistake, just a note that didn't work. But yeah, it didn't belong. I mean, I think terminology can really help or hurt. If I call everything a mistake, if I didn't put the exact color or value, then I could just really beat myself up for no reason. I might have a very poor impression of how this is going, and it might stop me from being into my painting, and it could hurt me in a lot of ways. So I try to get away from the idea of right, wrong, looks good, looks bad, mistake, failure, all those things, even falsely propping yourself up like it looks spectacular, that can hurt you too. So if we just treat all this as raw information, I think we're gonna be better off. And so I'm constantly picking students up, not because I'm lying, because it's true. Everything to this stage is just a suggestion, and you don't have to attach your ego to it. It's just, it builds that idea of where to go next, and you simply can't hit the undo button. So you're here now, and what do you do next? Well, you have more information than you had a second ago, so you can embrace that. Liz, were you gonna say something?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. Okay, that shadow's starting to look harsh because I've built up the values around it. And harsh is just not a beating myself up term. It's more of articulation. So if you can put your words on what's striking you about an area, now I just simply haven't gotten to it yet, so it's not a mistake. It was just a block-in. But if I can put my words on it to say harsh, that just means that the values jump too far, too fast. There's too much contrast there, and it's leaping instead of transitioning. Great. Well, that's just good, usable information. And so I just went on this long diatribe about being a little bit more gracious with yourself over this terminology of oh, that looks bad, or this looks good, or right, wrong, all this stuff. But if you can put your words on what it is that's bothering you about it, so in this case it was harsh, then you're already kind of in a step up for figuring out, well, where's the problem solved? I'm gonna lighten these values. I'm gonna do it with some warmth, and because the light source would be warm, it'd be the skin tone bouncing into the side of the nose. I'm gonna brighten this, and that's going to decrease the contrast and therefore less harsh. So that little reflection really helped. No, for now. So I'm bringing her out. I'm going to take a break on her face for a while, pretty soon, just because I can build up more information that'll help me get this right. And by right, when I start to get really specific, that's when I can start thinking about, the style of the painting, the contrast, the colors, everything. Like I said earlier, is just a suggestion. My blocking of the eyebrows got cut into for that next stage of articulation, and so they're not as good of a placeholder as they could be right now. So I'm going to work on that, and then I'm going to work on the shadow a little bit more. I'm going to work on the hair, neck, and shoulders, and then I'm really going to get some softness into the face, because right now it's a little jumpy, especially in these highlight values. And again, jumpy is just a really good descriptive term for telling me what to do next, not to be down in the dumps about, or to justify, or whatever. Using this tiny brush, typically I stick to the large brushes for longer than I'm doing. Again, I'm not wed to any one technique, and I'm quite willing to change it up. But I did start with a big brush for a very long time. That outline might be neat for later on, but it's too thick. It's too bold. And I might get a nice wispy outline later, because it adds a real sort of nice, bold crispness to it. It might flatten her out just a tiny bit, but that's okay. And that's just me kind of thinking in my head, well, how am I going to end this sort of strategy of making her really pop? And that's where I'm leaning right now. I might change my mind later. If I go into hyper detail, which I doubt I'll do, then I'll be working these edges of eyebrows with little hair shapes. I highly doubt I'm going to do that. But again, you can form those little strategies that help you kind of build small goals. Still bouncing around big time. But when I feel like everything's sort of on that next tier of 5 values, then I can really hone in on the eyes and then build my way out, so that I make sure they become the star of the show. You might be able to get away with a portrait painting that isn't all about the eyes, but it's kind of hard to convince the viewers of your work that the eyes aren't the star of the show. So might as well embrace that and just say, well, that's going to be the focal point. And when I'm ready to really get specific, that's where I'm going to spend my time. Okay, so the imbalance in the jaw is something that I want to address. I want to get rid of a lot of this dark here and turn it into a gray. Thin paint will do that. If I'm using brush strokes, the brush strokes will sit on top of the previous layer. If I do it with a single brush stroke, it'll just sit on top with a, whatever color I put down. If I let it get weak like this, it's going to mix with that bottom layer. And if you can develop a feel for that, then you're never gonna make mud. But it's really that idea is really easy to make mud, and you just got to watch out for it. It's like you don't want to improperly smash two colors together that may not mix very well. So like color complements will make usually a brown. And if you didn't want a brown there, then that was a bad thing to let one brushstroke smash into the other with. So a lot of times I'll develop paintings with brushstrokes, which means that I'm going to mix the color and value that I want, lay it down with almost a single brush stroke and leave it alone, and then work into it with the next brush stroke and the next brush stroke. I'll very specifically mix that color I want. That sounds burdensome, but if you're building off of color mixing piles, it's really not so bad. You're just kind of tweaking a pile that you already have. If you're moving from light to dark, you're just going to keep adding darks according to the color of the light. You know, so if the light is warming up the color, then you're going to cool down the shadow, and those are going to be the darks that you use. Whatever color you're going to use is going to cool down the color. I feel like I'm talking too much. All right, back to the big brush. Been nitpicky for a while. Probably have a middle brush I could use. Yeah. One creative decision I might make, and I'm looking at it, and it's something that I've been toying with for a while, is I might really overdo that this gray atmosphere is going to bounce its light into the skin. And I think I'm going to experiment with that now as the very next thing that I do, as a way of getting cools and warms into the shadow, which might look really neat. And it might not work, so that's why I want to try it now as a little experiment. And so I might overdo, I'm going to take some blues. I might overdo some of this atmosphere bouncing its light into the skin. Let's see what some of that can look like. If I get sort of blue-gray into the temple, I could put it into the hair, I could put it into the ear, into the zygomatic bone, into the jawline here. So now we're going from blue to pink, peach, and that can look really neat. I think it's too bold and too bright right now, but again, that's just a descriptor. Those terms help me understand what to do next. So it is bold, but it's getting into this idea that this gray is almost a second light source instead of just bouncing off of the atmosphere. And you got to start somewhere. So I put something down, and then I can react to it. And I kind of like this idea of, it's not my idea, it's more of like Joaquin Sorolla's idea of every time we change color, we're also changing color temperature. So if I'm going to a rich, warm turning shadow, then popping back out to this sort of exaggerated cool looks really, you know, pretty bold without changing the value too much. So I've found another way of making expressive contrast without harshness so much. I mean, this shadow is pretty harsh right now, and you know, it's something that I'm going to address as I build more information. But this blueness in here, I think, as a color pop to this pink, I like it. So I think that's good for the painting. And again, I haven't redressed the eyes yet for this reason. It's just like, well, what does it have to compete with? I've spent a little bit of time getting eyes to a second tier of block in, and now I'm kind of building the rest of the portrait, and then I'll go back to it from a place of a lot of good, helpful support. You see that a lot of that skin tone that I left behind on purpose in the forehead, it's part of the color mix, but it's not as garish. It's tempering as I add more information. I don't want to lose it completely because I liked it. It just didn't belong for much of the portrait. Yeah, I like that blue a lot. So I'm going to reestablish it in some bold areas that I can get away with being bold, and then let it fade into this sort of violet for the turning shadow, like this brown violet. And then the neck doesn't have to be so high contrast, because now I have this extra little tool for brightening the neck, almost like there's a distant window, or this gray is bright enough to bounce its light into the skin. And it takes a little bit of the harshness out of the shadow, which in the photo, you know, I wouldn't call it super harsh. It's harsh enough to do something about. So some artists at this point, when they're, when I'm finished doing what I'm doing, they would consider blending. Fine choice. You could also consider just breaking down each brush stroke a little bit smaller and more specific with each little shift. That's another way. I could switch the technique into one of really just bold brush strokes, and that's another way of bringing it together a little bit. So I have unlimited possibilities for style at this point, because I've done a lot of the groundwork to make it, just kind of have those 5 values. I haven't worked the forehead very much, but those 5 values, and then, smaller shapes, and each new shape can inform the other shapes of whether the smaller shapes fit. If they don't fit, then there's an adjustment to make. Hopefully, if you let the first round of simple abstractions, if you gave them their moment of scrutiny, then they're almost right, and they just need little tweaks. Not the end of the world if you maybe rushed and went on to the next stage a little too early, but much better if you can catch those things early on and make the adjustments when they're the big shapes, and then little tweaks to make the smaller shapes fit, and then even smaller shifts to make detail fit. And that's the pattern that I like to go. I can also see that my initial start was maybe a little, I don't know, maybe a little small. And again, it's good information. It's just the way I'm going to tweak this. If I was worried about the outside edges of the composition, like it had to fit a very specific way, or if there was other compositional elements that had to fit too, then that would tell me at this stage, okay, it's probably wiser to start cutting rather than letting the shapes keep adding, adding to the overall size. And so, by no means accurate, by no means done, by no means am I protecting any one area. Like, again, the eyes are a really good place that everybody is so worried about that by this stage, maybe they're already protecting the eyes. And I don't have to, because of, I didn't give it that much attention. I let everything kind of develop as squint level shapes. Color mixing, I just missed twice with my color mix. I tried something that just didn't work, and that's not a mistake. That's the way I like to color mix. I like to put a little suggestion down, and then I'll ask myself, is it too light, too dark, too warm, or too cool? And then I make another little adjustment, and then do it again. Too light, too dark, too warm, too cool. Another little tweak, try it again. And if it takes me 4 tries, then so be it. It took me 4 tries. If it takes me 1 try, then, you know, I try not to get neither too up or too down about it. It just on to the next color value, which again, it's both color and value at the same time. They both belong in the same shape. So color, value, and shape are considered simultaneously at this stage. Before, the initial underdrawing was just shape, not even value. Then the next round was value only within those shapes. And then the third consideration was color, value, and shape simultaneously, still pretty abstract. And then 5 values. And now I'm getting closer and closer to refinement, to where I'm starting to problem solve on little moments that are going to be based on the eyes. That's where I'm going to hone in and be a little bit more specific. So I haven't really even started going bold yet, which is pretty late for me. This is also a lot thinner than I normally go with paint. A lot of times by now, I'm already starting to stack in some thick impastos. So I like mixing it up, and this painting is no exception. It's pretty different than the way I normally paint. I do crazy challenges on Friday night with figure models. And the one I struggle with probably the most consistently, I still get a decent product out of it, but trying to keep the paint thin. And so this has actually been a little bit more disciplined than usual. So that's too high contrast. Too high contrast is just a nice descriptive bit of information, which means that if I want to keep the dark, then I want to surround it with some darks that help let it not read as strongly. And so again, we just kind of plug it into that equation: too high contrast, too low contrast. If it's not showing up, that means too low contrast. If it's showing up too boldly, then it's too high contrast. And that doesn't tell you what the problem is. It just narrows the range of options down. And that really helps, I think. All right. So where are we? We're not even an hour in. All right. Thought I was going to have to pick up the pace so we can get to the eyes sooner, but if we're only 40 minutes in, then maybe I can work on this abstraction of the neck, and then I'll jump to the eyes. See, what I just put in is too dark. Again, it's not that I should guess right all the time. It's just good to be able to, just pinpoint what I think is going a little amiss. Not wrong, because it was just a guess. But I can definitely work with that. It's anytime you can put a descriptive. I actually don't know who it is. Hello, are you German? No, my grandfather was Hans. His father was Hans. It's just kind of a hand-me-down name. They've been in the States since the 1870s, I guess. And then I was born in Germany, but that was only because I'm an army brat. But thanks for asking anyway. Back to what I was saying. It was again, when you put this descriptive information in it, it's not to say right or wrong. It's just to inform the next decision. So I'm just kind of building raw information. I have a feeling that this dark, even though it's really dark in the photo, that it's just too distracting. And I'm gonna again, I'm gonna put a pin in that decision to change it. Oh, I like the blue too. Thank you for the feedback. I'm getting questions on YouTube for all you Instagrammers, or sorry, Zoomers. I finally got YouTube to work. Such a pain.
So Hans, you're a little bit more than an hour in because you started early.
I didn't start early.
You started 8. I mean, not early, but.
Oh, you're right. So I'm 2 hours. Okay, cool. Then I should pick up the pace. Yeah, I forgot about that. Normally I start at 9. You're right.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I was going slow. Slower than usual. I'm doing a different technique. Yeah, that was yeah, good insight, Liz.
She has really pronounced clavicles.
She does, but this is too much. I think they're distracting.
No, I mean, I was looking at the photo.
Yeah, the photo, that could be a product of the lighting, and she probably, I mean, she is pretty thin, so imagine those clavicles are just reading really strong. The thing is like, do I want them to command as much attention as in the photo? And I think the answer is no. But I also want them to look accurate. What were you saying? Were you saying something, Liz?
Yeah, I was saying that I think it looks accurate to me.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean, though.
Yeah, accurate isn't always the right. Just make it, you know, like her doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't check all the artistic boxes just because it can be accurate and distracting. But
Yeah,
the two can be true at the same time.
Right. I guess you want to make it flattering.
Well, okay. So sometimes what I'm doing now is trying to copy it the way I see it, and then I'll make artistic decisions later. Which just means I can make one-to-one comparisons while I'm still figuring some things out.
Right.
I have it in my head that I'm going to reduce the contrast of these shadows because they command so much attention. I'm not ready to do that yet, simply because of you know, I don't have the totality of my values in yet, and I might change my mind on that later if I squint at the whole painting and I decide it's working harmoniously. Then great, I'll leave it. But I doubt it. But even so, even if I don't change it now, I'll have more information to get it exactly what I want based on more information if I just keep moving forward.
Right.
And so that's mostly behind the decision making of where I am right now. It's just I want to get the whole block in. And right now I'm gonna go from simple to specific. So I'm just gonna really chop these. Wow, that's way too dark. I'm just gonna really chop these in and leave them, even if I feel like there's some flaws, which, you know, I'm not going meticulous enough to not really have some things that I want to change, but I'm also not going to refine it either. You know, even if I'll see a mistake and I'll just going to leave it for now. Mistake is wrong. You know what I mean?
I do.
But this neck clavicle, it's just grabbing my attention too much. It's just not a time to really panic about it. I'll panic later. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I am normally at 9. I just had an opportunity. I got, you know, got some support with the kids, and
That's good.
all right. So again, these darks are accurate to the photo, but they just grab my eye too much, and I don't like them. So I'm gonna leave the upper chest alone. I'm gonna let it fade out. I'm gonna get rid of this hot pink here. It did its job. It's just not working anymore. And then I'm probably gonna go even bolder for that blue. I'm gonna base that on the eyes after I get the eyes in. So the eyes are next. I'm gonna get the eyes as my focal point. I'm gonna get them really worked out, and base all my other decisions based on those eyes, because right now they're just simply blocking. I'll make a decision about the background. I'm going to definitely develop the hair, especially that transition from the scalp into the hair. I might even get some flyaways on the edges, because right now the head grew a little bit from blocking till now, and now the hair doesn't feel like it's a volume on top of the skull, so it's definitely going to get bigger. Again, that's part of the discovery process, and even if I see it early, doesn't mean I have to get all the it doesn't mean I have to change it right away. I did early on. I had to early on. I would be embarrassed. I didn't want anyone to see any mistakes. Now I'm at a stage where I'll just keep it, I'll put a pin in it. I'll get to it when it's appropriate. I don't really need to fix it, right off the bat. But that little note there is nice to bring this gray blue into the hair. So that was a nice little note. So to a further point is, yes, I'm going to change it to make it accurate, but I'm going to change it in a forward moving direction. So adding this color to make the volume shift got me two elements all at once. And then like the transition of the hair into the scalp, well, I'm not quite ready to do that because the scalp isn't quite right yet. I need to desaturate it. Like I said, I started with a skin tone that was a little over the top in color, quite on purpose. I said that even before I put it down. It's like, I'm going for too dark and too colorful. So I can desaturate with cooler gray light, and then desaturate it with turning grays. So warm browns to turn the form. And I'll do two adjustments at the same time with adding. And so I'm adding this sort of grayer, brighter version with this cool gray light into the hair. I'm going to take it maybe a little bit too far. Again, quite on purpose. And then I'm going to take the hair back into that scalp and let them mix a little bit, as if you're going to see the hair through little hairs. Or you're going to see the scalp. Yeah, you're going to see the scalp through little hairs. And it's going to have a little bit of a feel, not necessarily, hair by a million little squirrely lines, but it's going to have that feel of the scalp in there in the direction of the light. So I haven't quite pulled it off yet, but that's the idea of what I'm doing, because I don't really want to do individual hairs, especially not alla prima. And if I made my mind to do that, I would do it later. Definitely wouldn't want to do it too soon. And so a lot of these little subtle things, or sometimes I'll leave behind something that I know isn't working yet, for the idea that not only can I make a better decision with more on here, and I'm just not ready for some areas yet, but also too is I can solve two problems with the same brushstroke. I can make this transition of scalp through hair growing out of the forehead at the same time where I make the drawing shift. And it doesn't mean that I've caught everything right off the bat. I certainly didn't. And then the head growing a little bit changed my perception of the skull, or the skull under the hair. And yeah, for me, that's just the journey of the painting. I don't have to have it completely worked out from the start. It's just a little adventure. So all to be expected, really. Just depends on how comfortable you are with things not working in the very beginning. I've gotten quite accustomed to that because we're just building information. It can't all be right. And the next little problem solved presents itself because you're building information. And I really like that idea. It works for me. So I'm sure my students at the Schuler School, I'm sure they look at some of my starts like, what is he doing? All right, so I'm going to start building some softness. I'm going to really focus on these eyes. I'm going to get the eyebrows right. I'm going to get these little transitions from like the socket into the glabella a lot softer. And work my way out to the nose and mouth, and then really figure out what to do with the rest of the head with a lot more information. Now I think it's a good time for some creative choices too. Like adding that blue-gray, I think is, it's kind of there, but it was a bit of an exaggeration. And I thought that was a fun choice, but I'm going to be doing a lot more of that. And again, she has pretty heavy eye makeup on, so I'm going to add just a little flash of pink. We're looking slightly down on those lower eyelids, and there is a thickness to the lower eyelid that usually catches a little bit of light if it's not painted. In this case, it's a little painted. I took that a little too far, and that's okay. So I'll just fix it with the next brush stroke. She has brown eyes, quite dark, but I'm going to play up the idea of refracted light. So I'm going to go beyond what I see in the photo. And again, anything transparent can have refracted light. So I want to play up the refraction of the light. That's bent light. It's going through the eye, and it can only read against darks because it's not bright light. It's passing through the eye almost like a marble, like transparent glass. And so if I go too bright, it'll feel almost like direct light instead of passing through that thin membrane. So I know what my upper limits are, and that allows me to really go for something that falls short of that upper limit, and hopefully make something a little more dramatic than I see. So the eyes were really lackluster until this point, just because I wasn't ready to do that yet. Now I'm ready to start honing in and getting specific, and then base everything else off of these sort of focal areas. If the focal area doesn't work harmoniously with the rest of the painting, though, I wasted my time. Because then I'm either building a whole painting around a tiny little landmark, or I'm leaving a mistake or undoing all that hard work. And so all three choices are not so fun to me. And maybe another artist will say, maybe another artist will say, oh no, you got to start with the eyes and work your way out. Well, that works for them. I'm not going to call that wrong. I'm just telling you my preference. Took that dark just a little too far. Now we'll get a nice highlight in there and then adjust again, because now we're going to put an extreme bright light. I'm going to go pretty close to white there. I think it stands out maybe a little too much, but I like the richness of the dark, so I'd rather knock down the highlight than lighten the darks. There's usually more than one choice every time. So I picked the highlight to change over the darkness. Way too bright. Yikes. Quite all right. Yeah, nice glow going through her eye. A lot more than what I see in the photo. I'm gonna get a tiny bit brighter with the sclera right here as an adjustment. Now that I can see that bright light of the highlight, I can know what I can get away with. And then maybe just turn a tiny bit grayer as I get underneath the eye, turning away from the light. And then I'll re-solidify that nice sort of outline of the iris. Give it a nice crisp edge. I lost it a little bit, and that was okay. Because a lot of these tiny outlines and tiny shapes, I'd really rather not paint around them. Now, I can get probably my darkest accent in the eye itself. In my darkest accent, I'd rather be hot than cold, so I'm not going to use black. I'm going to use black with a little alizarin crimson. That warmth is going to give it a richness that makes it extremely dark and not dead in color either. So that's going to be my richest dark in this eye that's catching more light than that other side. And then I can just decide, do I have too much refracted light? I'm guessing now that I have this information that I'm going to say yes and darken in here. That reduced a little bit of the contrast to the pupil, and that's okay. But it allowed for that refracted light to not stand out so much. And that was a good thing. So again, pick your poison sometimes. No, that's not even the right term. Not pick your poison. Choose what's best for your painting. And so, I don't want to go that dark anymore. That was my kind of upper limit. And now all my decisions from there can refer back to that spot. Some artists really like to get lightest light and darkest dark in early. I don't. Because they're just such important areas, such important considerations that I'd rather have a better context to get them exactly what I want. And I'd want to place them just right because the shapes around them are well informed. And definitely not calling any other artists wrong. I'm not saying their technique is bad. I'm not saying what they're saying is a bad idea. Just do it a little different. A system that works for me. And so I always like to say that, we're not going to think the same way. We're not going to want the same finished product. We're going to have natural tendencies that are going to be a little bit different, different comfort levels, different areas of focus. All that's to be embraced, I think, rather than saying, okay, you've got to abandon your natural proclivities to do it my way. I don't know. I think as long as we get to the same fundamentals, then we're good. The crease the upper eyelid fits into seems like it's a nice sharp edge, but I'm going to soften it just because I know that it's rolling into that structure. Sharp edge compared to some things, harder edge compared to others. All right, so I did this pretty specifically too. I didn't want to put eyelashes in. I'm going to do a simplified eyelash, but I didn't want to put those in until I got the base underneath them established. I definitely don't want to paint around detail, and I definitely don't want to accidentally undo detail. And I wanted to establish that the area that the hairs go around first. Same thing with the lower eyelid. I'm ready for that now. Lower eyelid is just a down plane, and it's facing bright light, so it's going to get a lot of reflected light. I don't want it to be too dark. She is wearing makeup, but I want to establish an eyelid that is going to read a little softer. Now, just like before, I need to be careful not to work in this area alone for too long. I want to work on the other eye too. I'm saying that more for me than for anybody. I'm gonna remind myself of some of these nice considerations. What's nice about cool skin tones is they might gray the colors of warm skin tones. Everybody's skin tone is warm, but they make it pretty easy to do the color shift. Just adding white cools it down big time and desaturates the color. You can add little subtle blues and greens and stuff like that too. But if I want to desaturate and brighten, then white's a really good candidate for that. And whoa, way too bright. Just makes it a little easier to kind of figure out, well, what am I going to do to bring that next level of brightness in there? Warm skin tone, warm light can look really dramatic though. Okay. You see a big jump in value right there. That was a note that I left behind, and now I'm ready to soften it. I'm bridging that gap in between the brush strokes. It leaps from here to here. Now I need something in between. That was a bad guess. That too. Third time's a charm. Better. So that little note left a harshness that, again, it's just information. It tells me, okay, now that I have more context in my brightening up to get to that darkness of the eye socket, or am I darkening to make it less impactful? And my choice was made up because now I have more information to get it right. So that eye's getting a little bit softer. I feel like now that I have more information, I could even go brighter with sclera. And then I'll add just the hint of eyelashes. I don't want to do hairs, so I'm not gonna go crazy with that. All right, that heavy outline is not working anymore. So I've got a couple recourses for that. I mean, I could either scrub it away, I could develop the background, or I could take a clean brush like this and almost use it like an eraser I think I need a firmer brush for that idea though. So I'm going to erase that outline to be very, very thin. And by now I know that the right way to trim it is to cut the outside edge rather than bringing the flesh out to trim the line. That can make a difference. That you know, it seems almost insignificant, but I think it can make a big difference. So what if I miss and go too far? Well, no problem. I'll just work the edge again. The reason I said that is because I feel like I missed and went too far. I'll just remix my skin tone. I've got some ochre. I've got some sienna, got a touch of cad, got a touch of white. And I don't feel like I'm even bright enough in here yet, but all good. I'm within the problem solve. Now I got a really soft edge. I might reestablish that. That outline because I felt like it gave it a lot of strength. But that's the decision I can make. All right, so like I said, ideally I'd already be working on that other eye by now. So I'm kind of violating my own way. And again, I don't really want to do regimented single brushstroke eyelashes, but she does have very expressive eyelashes. I'm going to get a hint of that going on in here. It's a little bit more detail than I normally go, but for this portrait, maybe it's a little worth it. And you don't have to chase detail. You don't have to get everything, every little idea in. Ideally, those little wispy hairs sit on top of a decent value. That's why I did the value first. I have that little flash of pink in there. And I feel like I can even do a little bit bolder of a highlight opposite this highlight right here to get a glisten in the eye, and then let it disappear a little bit. I might refine this a little bit more, but I better get to that other eye. One other thing that I want to do, I keep saying I'm going to do the other eye, but there's just one other thing I want to do. So I want to bring some lightness into here. That was still part of the block in. And so it was a little heavy as a dark. You can get a highlight in there. I just find it really distracting. So I'm not going to do that. And then all right, so for Alla Prima, you gotta put a time limit on some things. This is already longer than I normally work on any one area in Alla Prima. I'm usually jumping around a lot, and I'm ready to move on. So if I get more time, I'll work on that. But for right now, it's probably good enough. So this eye, it's nice to see the comparison between block in 5 values and a little bit more refined. Okay. Moving forward, this eye is getting less light, so it's going to get less of a refraction. I still want to put a little bit because I am going to put a highlight. It only makes sense with a highlight. Without a highlight, there'd be no light to pass through the eye. So it really doesn't make sense to have a refracted light and no highlight. So I see that a lot. I guess, I don't know. I'm only bringing it up because it bothers me a little bit, but
elaborate just a little bit about that?
The refracted light, that glow that happens in the opposite side of the highlight on the iris, happens because the eye is translucent and the light is passing through. So refraction means bent. That's bent light. So without a bright, sparkly highlight, this the glow that happens doesn't really belong.
Oh, okay.
And like if you have a really diffuse light source, you're not going to see it as brightly. So if you were in a north-facing skylight alone with no lamp, then it probably is so subtle that, I mean, it's just barely a consideration. But you have a very bright light source, you can get away with a lot more. So, I mean, if I put a bold highlight here, then I'd be giving both sides equal light, and this is closer to the light. So, yeah, you can get away with some things. I'm just treating it a little bit more verbatim right now, and I could always make those creative decisions later. If I wanted, if I just felt like this eye was kind of dead, then maybe that's a good way of giving it a little bit more oomph. And yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There's a lot you can get away with in art that looks great, but isn't technically accurate. I mean, we call that what artistic license. You know, especially if you break the rule because you know the rule and you just break it effectively. So I noticed that this eye got a little smaller and it works for the overall head. That was way too bright. And so my decision making on this eye, just working in pairs, is going to be to reduce this eye too. And then they're going to hopefully be harmonious not only to each other, but also to the whole head. Also going to make the decision to make this eye a little bit smokier, a little bit less refined, just because we're getting outside of this bright light, just barely. And that little consideration can bring more of a focal point to this side than this side. This is the shadow side. That makes sense. Being a little technical right now. Those are some of the things on my mind.
I love hearing that stuff.
Bothers me a little bit that this highlight isn't bright enough right here. I'm using a very soft technique, and you'll see that instead of doing single brush strokes that have just a ton of sort of vigor to the brushstroke, I'm kind of letting it melt into the midtone that I established. That's a lot softer of a look. And if it needs a little boldness at the end product, then I'm gonna go to single brush strokes, just because it's gonna bring a lot of intensity back to this. Right now, I'm going for a soft technique, and right now, you know, it's kind of working. I don't know. I think I'm gonna end up putting some boldness into this, maybe even some impasto by the end. That's a note that I'll have in the back of my mind as I build this up. Not necessarily something I have to address now. So if you watch some of my other videos, you'll see that most of the time I'm being a lot more aggressive with the technique. This is it's a little bit more subtle. Again, I like to show a little bit of range, even though my typical technique is a lot bolder. I think heavy makeup is perfectly fine, but it flattens the eye out a little bit. So I'm gonna create a little bit more plane change than what I see. I don't think it's over the top makeup. I'm not saying anything critical of the model. I like the. I might expand this a little bit. Again, that's a nice advantage of working on both simultaneously. And I focused on this a little bit more than I normally do. That's a little bit to my detriment. So it's like now I'm kind of digging how big this eye is, but this is already refined. So it's like you have a decision to make. It's like, am I going to undo something that I like because something is already established, or undo hard work with limited time of alla prima? That's why you want to do this simple to specific approach. That's exactly what I'm saying is the downside of refining any one area at the expense of the rest of the drawing. And this is the time to hone in, but the eyes are a symmetrical pair. So it'd be better if I did a little bit of build up, a little bit of build up, a little bit of build up, a little bit of build up. And it's just not the way I did it. I can keep that in mind as this develops, though. So I will make my decisions to cut rather than add. And again, if you have a direction you want to go, that limits the choices. And limiting the choices is good because you might just be, able to make really quick choices as to what the next step is based on, okay, I'm cutting rather than adding. That makes it a little easier. Okay. When I get this eye a little bit more established, then I can go pretty fast. Because it's important to get this kind of right in this technique, in that I'm honing in the focal point, and then every decision is going to be based on how does it support this spot. And I want to be very conscious of that, but I can go a lot faster because this is establishing the basis of comparison. And it's worth it to take a little bit of extra time here. Again, some paintings I go a lot faster, but you know, this has a little special consideration to do. I've done almost nothing with the hair. I've done literally nothing with the background. I might keep it that way for the background with just leaving it simple, because it already works as a value compared to the portrait. But time will tell. All right. Okay, so as soon as I get this eye established, then I'm going to go to all brush strokes. So single drags of specific color, direction, and value. I'm usually going to limit it to 2 tops and go back to the palette every time I've done that second brush stroke. And it's going to create just a little bit more vigor to the painting. It already has this soft base underneath of it, so as long as I don't go too crazy with impasto, all this will read through and inform the decisions. I still feel like this shadow is just a little bit too cold and too dark. But again, I'm going to address all that in relationship to the eye, because I can see it a lot better now that I've got an establishment of what I'm comparing it to. I hope that makes sense. So I've left a lot of areas that I just know weren't quite right, quite on purpose. Like the harshness of this shadow, which I just supported rather than changed. But the harshness of this shadow is going to be tailored to making sure that the head is working according to the focal point, which is the eyes. And I'm getting closer and closer to having that balance point. Okay. For the sake of time, we are, what, a half hour from 11. I said that this was going to be from 11 to, all right, so from 8 to 11:30. So I'm still doing pretty good time-wise. I'm going to establish, I don't actually see this part as being blue-gray, but, whoop, bad. I don't see this as being blue-gray, but because I'm doing all this with the cheek and the temple, it just seems like it would be a nice touch. I'm not fully done with the eyes, but I'm done-ish, because I'm gonna build the rest of the painting, and then I'll have another basis point for getting that eyes just right. And so I definitely want to start working on other things. I want to start working on creating a little bit more visual excitement for the painting, because these real soft, delicate brushstrokes, they're nice, they're delicate, but they just don't have much oomph. I'm going to build some oomph into this as I'm building more accuracy. I'm going to get a little bit more expressive with color and with texture, so I'm going to start adding some thickness to the paint, because right now it's like tickling the surface, which again a lot of people do. It's just not the way I like to paint. So the mouth isn't right. It's still in that block in. And a lot of times with block in, there's kind of a good enough quality, but now it's not good enough. It's ready for information. And by what I mean by good enough, it's just not that I don't care. It's just that it's going to be informed by other things. So there's no point in getting every little nuance right yet. It was time to just get raw information close as a placeholder for this big build-in, and now I'm getting more specific, and now it's time to get it right. I'm going to make sure that it doesn't take very much attention away from the eyes, which again might not be fully done yet, but certainly enough to base the next decision on. And like all this is kind of plasticky, it doesn't have any oomph to it, so I'm going to put some oomph in it. I don't think the lighting in this portrait is very helpful for that, so I'm going to probably make up a little bit for what I want. And again, that's going to be almost single brush strokes, if not at most two. So I have a plan, and then the painting is going to give me some information too. The photo has a bit of a harshness into the upper lip. I'm going to soften it more than I see. And I think that's a good suggestion for most portraits. You don't want a very hard-edged line of the upper lip. And so I'm going to bring the light maybe a little too far into the upper lip, and then I'm going to bring the lip back into that line for a soft edge. Maybe even a little counter direction to the brush stroke. It's going to give it a softness. It's going to take away a little bit of that harshness. I don't really want that bright outline anyway. So working back into it is a nice touch. I'm going to develop a little bit of the shadow of the node, which I don't really see that clearly in the painting, but I want to. And that's where having just a little bit of anatomy helps. You can certainly do all your problem solving on just the shapes, but knowing what the possibilities are is even better. And it's a little dangerous at first making things up because, you know, your knowledge could be pretty incomplete. And I'm not going to say mine is perfect. It's just close enough to know, hey, I can get away with ... you know, whatever little thing. Like I know about adding refracted light and keeping it subtle if I don't have a bright highlight. So I know there's a little limitation to consider as I invent some stuff. And again, I'm painting really thin paint, more so than usual, which I'm gonna start going a little bit bolder. Okay. So I mean, there's some things that I like at this stage and some things that I don't. Just kind of sneaking up on it. Definitely not terribly thrilled with the kind of plasticky blended look So I think instead of just talking about it, it's time to just plant some bold brushstrokes in here. Bring some visual excitement into this. Okay. So every brush stroke from here on out is probably going to be more of the single brush stroke, maybe two. That was two, but they also don't have to be huge. They just have to be the drag in the direction, color, and intensity value of the value. And if I get beyond that, then it'll look, I don't know, it'll just look a little off, and I'll make the next adjustment. So it's not like I have to get everything right. Just have to get close. And there's no pressure. But every time you drag the paintbrush across the surface, there's obviously going to be less paint on the tip of the brush because it's depositing that paint into the painting. And I mean, that seems like it's a, yeah, duh thing, but as you're painting, you can see it all the time where you've taken maybe like 20 little. Now I was doing that earlier. Like I said, it just wasn't pleasing. It was looking very plasticky because everything was kind of melted together. It didn't have this strength of brushstroke that I want to start incorporating. I was getting a little eager to do it, and it's definitely time. I definitely have enough information that I can put it in there safely without really compromising the forms too much. Like if I put this brightness in here, that made the lip too dark. So I'm still making decisions. Like I want to bear in mind that as I add information, it's going to change my perception of other things. But I have a lot of information down. It's not going to be a wild guess. Like this shadow in here was part of my initial range of darks. That just needs a further refinement. But now I lost the shadow completely. Oh well. Whoa, way too bright. The shadows I will address a little bit differently in the light. So in here, the brush strokes are going to be single brush strokes, maybe two tops. But in the shadows, if I can leave them relatively thinner, it creates an other. So creating an other is a nice idea. So if light is other than shadow by whatever metric, that's a good thing. So if we think about real light and real shadow, we don't see rich color as well in shadow. We don't see texture as well in shadow. This doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but those are really good things to create others with if you have that consideration. So if I want to create an other between light and shadow, getting more muted colors in the shadow, getting thicker paint in the light, that's a good way of differentiating light from shadow with these subtle contrast notes. And they add up. So value is your most important. You know, light and shadow, if you get that wrong, then you've really changed the volumes that you're looking at, usually in a wrong direction if you get it wrong. Sometimes you can get away with little creative value notes, but very risky. then there's color temperature. So if I make the light warm and the shadow cool, I've created an other in color temperature contrast. And if I do thick paint in the light and thin paint in the shadow, that's other. If I do soft and smooth versus brush strokes, you know, that's a little bit on the same dialogue as thick and thin, but it's also a treatment of you know, how I'm handling the paint. And again, I just got to be really careful. Like right here created too much value contrast, even though that little note of saying that this little nasolabial fold is not getting as much light that's cooling down the skin tone as right here in the socket or right here on the zygomatic bone. But in adding brightness here, here, and here, it made that relatively dark. So you just, you know, you can try some things. It doesn't mean you get everything right. It just means that you keep your eye on that every brush stroke affects everything. And your visual perception of the things that you already had change. And so just keep your eye out on that. These hot pink notes, those are my original skin tone, and I intentionally made them too rich, quite on purpose. And now, just like I said, as I build this relatively gray brightness, now it's just screaming hot pink. And that's, again, my visual perception of that initial color changed. It was always a little too garish, but I already said that, you know, if I was going to guess one way or the other, I'd rather it be too rich and too dark. And it checked those boxes, and it was good enough for quite a long time, and now it's not good enough anymore. And like I said, I have to get back into those eyebrows big time. Oops, that was way too bold. So now she's starting to get a little bit of oomph. And like I said, I can readdress the neck and clavicles and all that stuff. I said I wasn't quite ready to do that because I didn't have this focal point to base it on. It's not that I couldn't have taken good guesses, but I can take even better guesses because I have context. And you know, I built up very globally, very generally, and now I built in some specific, and now I'm back to rebalancing the whole painting around this sort of subject matter with not crazy impastos, but thicker paint than I had. That was a lot of tickling the surface with little, you know, little tiny jabs of paint. But now if I come back in and put a brush stroke down, it's got some oomph to it. It's got some impact. And I'll have a little timer in my head saying that, you know, a little rhythm saying that I've done 2 brush strokes and now it's time to go back for the palette. Each new trip to the palette is a slightly different mix than the previous. And I'm going in that direction of light to shadow. As that light gets closer and closer to the shadow, it's getting a little bit, say, grayer but warmer. And that's the direction I'm going to augment the paint by. And as I'm going brighter in here, that shadow is starting to look really harsh. Well, great. You know, that just means I'm going to break the contrast down a little less than I have by, you know, my new information. Using kind of a big brush for this. You could definitely do smaller brushes. I don't think that corner of the mouth quite works yet. So let me go back to my eraser, because I still have a choice here as to whether I want to paint the background or leave it as that gray that I already have. So in this case, instead of just painting the edge of the background into the form, I'm trimming the edge with a clean, stiff brush, just a little bit of medium on it. All right, I better address his eyebrows soon. Okay. Lost my shadow there a little bit. And I think I could go a lot bolder with that blue. Not that it belongs as a, the environment anymore, but I'm going to make it as if like there's a distant window or something. That's going to make it a lot more impactful, making that bolder. So my first attempt at making it bolder is to go redder and darker with the turning shadow. That moment where we're no longer facing the direct light source, but it's also the same moment that we're no longer facing, say, like this secondary light source. And so it's going to be a soft edge from both directions, and it's going to add a lot of oomph to this line. Arguably, you can overdo this, but I'm going to give it a chance for a little while, just to say that as I add more of this dark, it'll feel less out of place. And so I don't want to react to it too soon. I do want to react to that. That's looking like mustache. Oop, miss. Again, I'd rather err on the side of soft edge for the mouth than big rigid streak. It's getting better. Okay. So that's that shadow. Now that I have more of it, I can make the determination, is it too bold? So I have a couple choices to make it less bold. I can work into the edge with a gray. That's going to soften it at the same time it lightens it up. I could work on that blue to transition to it from the other side too. And I'm going to do a little bit of both. Like I said, I have the inclination to make it way too much. Now that I know what I'm comparing it to, but that was already too much. I'd rather make that as an exciting kind of secondary light source rather than just the atmosphere bouncing a little light into it. So again, it's just a matter of an experiment. I'm going to put that down. Then I really got to address those eyebrows. I've said it like 4 times already. Sometimes I got to talk myself into the right decision by saying it like 4 times, especially when it's at the end of the night when I'm like, okay, I've got to stop. Okay, I've got to stop. Okay, I've got to stop. Okay. Maybe the 5th time I'll get it right. Okay, I felt like that got too bright in the lightening up. I do want some reflected light there, but that was just too bright. And little decision making. And every time that I'm going from warm light, then I'll shift to warm or cool light, then I'll shift to warm shadow, and then to cool reflected light, and then to warm cast shadow. Just it doesn't really matter exactly what the color is, as long as we have that sort of system of shifting temperatures. And yeah, I like that. It's a lot bolder than what's in the photo. That's just a fun quirk. So sorry, I'm a little jumpy with the things that I'm saying. It's because this is getting to be a little bit more need of concentration. So if I'm a little incoherent, that's why. But hopefully I'm making sense in my decision making, and I want to emphasize over and over again that this stage can really, you can make some decisions that just don't work if you're going beyond the photo. And that's a little bit risky, but especially for live demos. But I like risky. I like dramatic. And sometimes I'll really go for bold right away, but a lot of times I'll just get the block in the way I see it, and make those creative choices now that I've built it on observation and comparison, and now I've got a little bit more, I don't know, more of a safety net to make that next decision with just good context. And that blue does not work. So let's go a little crazy. So I'm going to justify all that blue light with this. It doesn't belong, but I think it's fun. Yeah. So it doesn't work yet because I need a lot more of it. And then I need to incorporate it into the very edge of that form. Now, there's either a little tuft of hair. I think it's like a pearl earring. If I don't explain, that ear is going to look really funny. But I'm not going to address that yet. So if the ear looks weird, just I'll acknowledge that it does look weird. Just it's missing something. All right, so now I can incorporate that into the edge. And now that I went really bold with this extra light source, I'm going to counteract that with a slightly bolder reflected light bouncing off of the chest into the neck. Now that we're overdoing things, I'll show you a little trick too. There's a little test we can do. Like this looks pretty bold, but I can do a quick check. Is it too bright? Well, all I've got to do is put a dot in the light, not one of the brightest areas, but that's darker than that middle tone. So it checked at least a minimum. So it is bold, but that chest is pretty bright. So it's not like it doesn't make sense. But it counteracts the boldness of the blue with just something else that's a little bit over intense. And now that I like that, I'm going to put that into the base of the nose. And now I'm making some bolder artistic decisions. hopefully never taking away from the eye. And again, that was the reason why I really wanted to establish that. Because if this took away from the eye, it hurts the painting. So let's just re-emphasize that line, re-emphasize the neck trap. Then we can fade it out a little bit. I don't want this cast shadow on the neck is terribly dark in the photo, and I don't want it to be that dark. Skin is translucent, so what I'm going to do for softening the edge is to get a little red outline here too, of say light passing through the skin and into that dark shadow. It'd be such an imperceptibly weak light that you really need it into the context of shadow. And a lot of times when like sunlight is hitting the side of a face, you'll see it. But it's just an exaggeration here. It's not realistic. It's just something that I wanted. And so I want to just explain those things, that they don't belong per se. They're just an option for exaggeration. So you'll see like still life artists, they'll do that sort of nuclear glow around a piece of fruit that's brightly lit. Well, yeah, it's very true that light radiates. It's just not true that it's that perceptible. But it's an artist touch. It's fun. You know, it makes it look artistic. To be just a little bit outside of reality, but still explain three-dimensional form. And I don't know, it's a nice touch. I don't exaggerate it nearly as much as other artists, but I might put a little faint glow around a piece of fruit or something into a dark background. So there's all kinds of things you can get away with. This edge is crazy. And so now that I've made some artistic choices, then I just need to work on the hair a little bit. I need to clean up this outline edge. I need to do a little bit more with the chest. I still feel like the clavicle is grabbing too much attention. And you can see that I wasn't terribly worried early on about style, and I wasn't terribly worried about softness or detail or accuracy. I was just trying to go from simple to specific, and hopefully with each new thing that I add, I've got more information to make the next right choice. So the accuracy is going to happen because of that. The artistry is going to happen because of that, because I have something to react to. And sometimes it even goes in a direction that's a little bit different than I intended in the beginning. And I think that's just a really cool thing. I think that's to be celebrated, not to feel like you're being, wishy-washy or like you failed to plan. Because I usually do have a plan. I leave it a little open-ended, just in case I want to change my mind based on what maybe the painting is saying, rather than some kind of rigid, can't divert from the plan. Some people want that much structure. More power to them. That's not wrong. Again, I want to celebrate a lot of different styles and just fully acknowledge that there's artists getting great results in, different pathways. And I'll even say for myself that I use different ways of getting, even on the same subjects. Like, again, people at the Schuler School see me do really, really quick demonstrations. And sometimes I don't even have as much time as I think I do, because I'll be going around teaching, and I tend to get a little lost in teaching, and then I might get back to the painting and I might not. So sometimes I think I'm going to have 2 hours to do a painting, and I really only end up getting 45 minutes or something. And I'll still try to get a finished product out of it. It's just a matter of kind of how I go in that pace to get to that finished product. You know, I might not get to I might not get to any detail, but it might work on the simple level, and then I only have to refine one small spot. And that can look really cool. And you know, sometimes in the choppiness, you know, you just don't have to go any further. You can just, if you're paying attention, you can say, okay, done, you know. Sometimes it needs to have a more refined focal area. And, you know, it tells you, okay, that refined focal area is just kind of too out of place, and I need more support. And so then you end up developing more than you thought you needed to. And the painting had its voice. It's not like you have to undo anything to stick to plan. You let the painting kind of tell you, okay, I need something else. I need something more. Or maybe it'll tell you you're done before you thought you were. So pay attention to what the painting's saying. Experiment with your own technique so that you can divert. You don't have to follow a rigid plan. So I experiment a lot. I try to make different techniques work. I don't necessarily recommend some of the crazy experiments I do with like figure models, with like odd implements. Like one time I painted the model with, you know, wadded up cardboard and spoons and forks and knives, and that was crazy, and I really couldn't control it, but I got somewhat finished product. So that doesn't really move the needle as far as skills go, but a lot of getting, you know, inspiration from a different technique that you don't necessarily do can really help expand your abilities to problem solve and you know, experiment for the good of even the active problem solving gets you more mastery, more skill. Same thing with the hairline. I don't want the eyebrows to just have a hard edge, because you'll see a little bit of the skin through the top of the eyebrows, and you might even see a little bit of like a gray of the light hitting the mass of hair. And so I just put a little red in there to see the skin tone. And I also might throw just a little bit of gray to show that it's picking up light too. I think that corner is too dark. I'm going to change that. It's been bothering me, and we're getting pretty close to the time to address something like that. So I'm winding this up. I think this spot reads too strongly. So I'm going to get a fine brush out and start addressing that. And I have my little formula for saying this color and value is a good way of transitioning from light to shadow. So there's not a whole lot to figure out. I already know my system for turning the flesh tone. Anything that's surrounded by darks is probably not as light as you think it is. Anything that's surrounded by lights is probably not as dark as you think it is. So I overestimated this brightness because it's surrounded by darks, and that's okay. I'm solving that problem before I'd call this finished. But you can look out for things like that. Now that stands out a lot less. It still is catching a little light as the node ends. And then we get into the muscle belly of depressor anguli oris. But even if you don't know those names, there's still an abstract shape that fits in here. It has a sequence of edges and color and value that makes it accessible to figure out. All right, I better start thinking about how to wrap this up. Again, that corner bothers me. The forehead is maybe a little bit undefined. That corner of the mouth is a little bit undefined. Maybe a little bit too much so. My plan was to let this dissolve out into brush strokes, and that is just a little bit too much. And again, it's just a little problem solve. Whoa, bad problem solve. I usually don't expect the first attempt at a brush stroke to be right. So again, that was too dark and gray. Now it's lighter and warmer. Sometimes I'll overguess on that. And then it's just another adjustment. I don't actually see that much cleft of the chin, and I don't see that much darkness there. I do see more transition here. So that's all three of those things combined are going to create a softness, hopefully with some brush stroke, that it doesn't make it just kind of plasticky looking. And I know a lot of artists that pull that look off well. It's just not the one I prefer. You know, with really smooth, integrated, kind of finessed on brush strokes, or not even brush strokes, but they're finessed on little, you know, paint edges. So hopefully at no point in this have I insulted anybody. And it's not that I'm avoiding it. It's just I truly don't believe that kind of stuff, that there's only one rigid way to do it. I don't believe that my taste in art is like the quintessential. I don't think that there's anything wrong with you know, doing it a different way, as long as we get to the same fundamentals. You know. And whoa. I think there's a lot of great diversity in realism, and it ought to be celebrated. So I haven't addressed the hair yet. Yeah. Now I'm a little behind. Yikes. All right. Hair, neck, done. Sign. It's not that I couldn't keep going. It's just getting a little outside the bounds of what I said I was going to do. I said I was going to do 11:30, and I'm looking at the clock. It's getting pretty close. Okay. So this clavicle belongs this dark and this light. It just, it bothers me how much it grabs attention. So I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to introduce some cools. I think I've done mostly warms in here. So I want to incorporate some bluer, grayer, blacker, raw umbery, or for lack of a real word, colors. I think I'm going to continue this blue outline. I might do a very thin wash for the Environment, if it were darker, she'd be more dramatic and the hair would be less impactful, and I could work these edges a little cleaner than erasing, because they got a little thick. And it's not like I can't get away with it. It's just, that's an easy adjustment. And I can still maintain the thinness of the background, which is important to me. And that goes into the decision making. Like that bright blue works, but the dark blue on the outside of it doesn't. And again, it's not that I couldn't get away with it. It's just, I don't know. I don't like it, so I'm going to change it. I don't like how this pit of the throat reads in the photo either. Get rid of that too. I saw a red note and I way overdid it. That was that little noise I made. All right, so I'm starting to enjoy a little bit of how the figure dissolves out. Like this line is too harsh, but I'm getting pretty close to what I want there. I don't want it quite as bold as I see in the photo, and I want it to blur out from define to not define. That's my initial sort of pink garish skin tone, and it doesn't work anymore. It was fine for the block in, and this shoulder is quite bright in the photo, but I'm going to make it less so, and I'm going to make it less colorful. And then I might even take just a very thin wash into the background, like I said before. And I need to refine that hair just a little bit. And then I need to step back and make final decisions and be done. And then I'll should be at 11:30, exactly when I said I was going to stop, which is usually pretty rare, but we'll see. We haven't gotten there yet. Normally I have a hard time putting the brush down. There's always one more thing, and then one more thing, and then one more thing, and then one more thing. But I'm chopping it up, not by any sort of plan, but just to make the statement clear that I'm giving it less attention. And whether that works or not, I mean, sometimes you try something, it just doesn't work. But I kind of like the way it's doing it. And so for now, I'm gonna just put a pin in it again. Just let it go for now, and I'll see what happens when I get a fresh eye and go back to it. Okay. All right. Here, not a whole lot to do there, and I don't want to work the outside edge until I do that little touch with the background. So how about, for the sake of order, I will do the background first. Little plan change. This is still too harsh. I don't recommend using pinky, but if you can use it well, go for it. I think this is too harsh. I don't recommend using thumb either. Perfectly fine to use solvent, especially for the background. I tend not to. Just a habit I built up over painting around. My wife, who is super sensitive to solvents, and I ended up just really liking not painting with solvent. And so some people are sensitive, some people aren't. If you're basing it on that, then that's an easy choice. But I don't go around telling people you shouldn't paint with solvent, even though I don't. So I'm going to leave a lot of air in the brush. I don't want any opacity, but I also don't want it to be super smooth, because think about her properties. Like, she is painted pretty smooth. So not smooth in the background would be other. I introduced that concept earlier, but it has relevancy in a lot of different places. So if the background is just simply, if I can put my descriptive a descriptive statement on the most important part, then I can create other with everything else, and just the opposite. So smooth, make it rough. Thick, make it thin. Directional brush strokes, make it chaotic. And then that creates something to read against. This shoulder is misshapen, so I'll adjust it with the background. Just don't pick up too much opaque paint, or else it'll drag it into the rest of the painting, which can work. It's just do it on purpose, not unintentional. Should work out that earring too, or just get rid of it. I might just get rid of it. So I'll have to rework that edge of the ear because I'm not being particularly careful. No big deal. So that made that streak of blue super exciting. I like that. Sometimes you do one extra thing and it, I don't know, creates another problem to solve. That really helped, I think. I'll work into the edge of the hair. I'm going to expand the hair a little bit, like I said, but I'm going to do it with working it into the background. Now, as far as her likeness goes, if anybody looked at the photo, there's a few little likeness things that I just didn't care about. I think her eyes are a little further apart. And I got to a certain point where I could have fixed it, and I just said, yeah, it doesn't have to be exactly her. It just has to be a decent portrait. So I think it's believable, but there's little likeness notes that, you know, just didn't seem important. Okay, so I'm going to rework the edge of her face into the new background. I'm going to fix the ear with this sort of streak of blue light. I'm going to work the edges of the hair. One little note that I want to make in the eye. The lower eyelid isn't being displaced by the volume of the iris. It needs to scoop a little bit right there. I feel like that's just a touch too much contrast. And I'm going to do something about that too. Better. All right, so last touches, I'm at 1120. So I'm actually right on time for what I said I was going to do. And this isn't exactly my painting style. So a lot of times when I'm mixing things up, yeah, I might go a little long if I have the choice. Like live model, a lot of times I don't have the choice. But so, oh, Liz, did you know I put a background in. I worked on the figure just a little bit more, all from memory.
Really?
Yeah, I did an extra hour. But
you mean on Friday night, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Did I say yesterday? Yeah, Friday night. Well, I mean, that's not necessarily a good thing because, you know, I'm working from my memory instead of from a model who's going to pose again. A lot of times I'll work on them when the model leaves just simply because, you know, I won't get to see the model in that pose again. And it just, you know, it's just time to make it a finished painting.
Is the painting still in the studio?
Yeah, it's in the studio.
Okay, I'll take a look.
I mean, it looks better with the background. I don't have her portrait likeness yet, but I was in a kind of a scramble with, you know, 5-foot painting, and we really only get 2 hours from the model with all the breaks. So
Right.
that was kind of a mad dash just to cover ground. And then the proportion was hard because it's almost impossible to step back in a crowded studio with a 5-foot painting. So it was hard to get the big picture. And everyone kept saying, it's like, well, why don't you just look in the camera? But the camera was super distorted. The camera looked dreadful in that, like the lower body was way too small for the upper body. And I couldn't really get much of a read from the camera either. So, so that was a tough one.
Yeah, that is a challenge.
Yeah.
I thought you had a likeness though.
I'll get. Let's put it this way: I'll get a lot better likeness on the next sitting
Okay.
because I'll really focus on that. Because the body proportions are okay. I think her upper body is just a little bit big for the lower body, just width wise, not lengthwise. So like the shoulders, upper chest, breasts, neck, head, they're all just a little bit big for like just the legs. The hips are fine. So I'll concentrate on that. I'll concentrate on the portrait head, and I'll concentrate on the hands. And that'll probably be the whole sitting. But I'm excited about it. It's fun.
I know. Me too. I'll probably start a new one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was debating in my head. Well, Paul was interested in maybe doing a third sitting because he's not going to be there for the second one. I don't know. We could talk about it.
Okay.
On mine, there's always more to do. I know you're doing single sittings like, pen and ink and, but you could consider doing if we could get a third pose, then you could consider doing a longer thing.
That's true. I could. If I thought it was good enough,
Of course.
Right.
Well, like I said, I mean, mine's not accurate per se. It's just kind of close. And I'd say it's good for being, if I had to qualify it as being good for a 5-foot painting in 2 hours, 4 if you're talking about what I do when the model's not posing, but that's always a bad idea. That's the do as I say, not as I do. Was that?
Yeah, but I can't wait to see it. So I'm looking forward to taking a look on Monday.
Yeah. I'm taking a lot of liberties with this hair. Like I said, her angle has the bun barely showing, and I think it'd be better if I exposed it a little bit more. I'm adding this sort of bold blue light, and in making it up, I just got to be careful not to go a little too crazy. But in here, I don't want the blue light, except for maybe just the faintest of outlines. Oop, that's not faint at all. Okay. Right as I said it, I did it exactly the wrong way. Fun, fun, fun. Yeah, I should probably spend a little bit longer on that ear, but I don't know.
You have 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
Maybe less.
Yeah, probably less. I have 3 according to the computer.
Okay, then 3.
I mean, it's not like I have to stop right on time. That was my vision for it, to try to rein in the time. Some of those alla primas took, up to like 4 hours, and that was not model breaks. That was just cranking away. Like that one with the radishes and the squash, the winter gourd.
I love that one.
Yeah, that was more like 4 hours. I mean, not that that's a long painting. It's just, get outside of what you say you're going to do. I mean, 4 hours is a really short painting for as detailed as that is. But
I know. It's a really good painting now.
Again, the more you have to qualify it, the more. All right, so I'm just going to adjust that jawline and then, you know, I'm going to call it. Might do a tiny bit more, you know, if I'm really bothered by something, but I'm thinking it's pretty much done. Hope you liked it. Again, it's just slightly different than the way I normally paint with all that sort of melting colors together instead of bold brush strokes. But I just thought I'd introduce just maybe a little bit more delicate than usual, because I like those big choppy brush strokes, and that would create a harshness to this, like a roughness I didn't want.
It's really pretty.
Yeah, you like it?
I do.
Thanks. I say a lot that alla prima is win some, lose some, and it's very much true. Like you can have it get away from you a little bit. Really hard to recover sometimes. So a lot of my system is based on that idea of alla prima, but there's a quote from Van Dyck saying that, you know, always endeavor to paint your painting alla prima. There's always more work to do. So even if you don't kind of fancy that this is going to be done in one sitting, if you have that mentality, that alla prima idea and approach, then you can get off to that really bold painting where you get the essence of what's there early, and the rest is just maybe you fall short of refinement, or maybe there's some very small things to adjust, but you can get off to a really rocking start if you have that alla prima mentality. Now, that doesn't mean everybody has to paint alla prima. It's just a great skill builder, but it is a little risky in trying to get a finished product. And that's what that win some, lose some is. It's like you could be struggling so much to get it done by a certain amount of time that it just doesn't pan out. And you might rush the initial steps that can really make or break a painting. So even though I think alla prima is great for everyone to get really good, it's not necessarily a great way to get a finished product. I've done an awful lot of them, especially figure. Oops, took that too far. Whoa, look at that, a reflected light. That's way too much. It's exciting. I think I can definitely make it a little duller and get away with maybe a touch too bright. That'd be fun.
I like it.
Happy accident. I just had the wrong paint on the tip of the brush. So it doesn't belong. It's a little outside of what belongs, but so what? It's exciting. Yeah, okay. So I'll live with that, and maybe I'll just make it a little less out of place with a bolder reflected light here, and maybe a little bit of that glow into the jaw, into the bottom of the corner of the mouth and underneath the lower lip. That was fun. Okay. I think that edge is too harsh. I think the ear is a little undefined.
I think it's okay though, because you know, the focal point is not there, so.
Something about this mouth bothers me. Yeah, I think I better call it, but
Thanks for doing this, Hans.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hope everybody enjoyed it.
I did.
Did you tell anybody, like Malika or?
I told a friend of mine, but she wasn't sure she would be able to get on, and
Oh,
I didn't.
your friend from where? Far away. I forget which country.
Cambodia.
Cambodia.
You know, I didn't tell her, but
Oh, okay.
I told another friend who couldn't make it, but
Okay.
yeah, and I was out most of the day, so I didn't really get to do that.
Well, I'll be doing a lot more.
Yeah.
Just got to find the right time. Last week was hard with the kids and a holiday.
Yeah.
Like their schedules were so far off. They weren't going to bed on time. And now they're getting back into being tired from school and all these million appointments Hans has to do.
Yeah. I think it's nice that you're doing a variety of things.
Not just Sala Prima Still Life.
Well, no, it's just nice for us because, you know, it exposes us to so much more.
Well, the reason I was doing Alla Prima Still Life is because I prefer working from life.
Right.
And I'm just not going to hire a model in my home at 9 o'clock at night.
No, this is fantastic to be able to watch you do a portrait.
Yeah, but I just, I prefer working from life.
Well, I know that, yeah.
Yeah.
But still, it's nice to see you work on that. For me, anyway.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Take a little bit of this shadow away. Better. And that's a little rough here. I gotta stop. I keep telling myself that. Now I'm right back into that trap of needing like 4 times of saying that I'm going to stop in order to stop. Like Friday night, working all the way till what? Like 9:30.
Yeah. I'm surprised you stopped then.
Me too.
Did you go home or did you stay?
No, I stayed.
Oh, you did? That was smart.
I had stuff to do. The school needs. We had to get all that Christmas stuff away, and
I'm glad you stayed, actually.
I actually had a pretty decent class today. I mean, I had 5, but icy weather could have made it 0 or only the online students.
Yeah, I went to the BMA and there were tons of people there.
Yeah?
And the weather was not great. I mean, it was nasty.
Oh, it was downpour, but like if you're coming from the north, like Ludmilla's still in Estonia, but like she'd be coming from Frederick.
Right.
So she might, I mean, even if she were in town, she wouldn't have probably come. And we used to get like Peggy Horse. She would have been in Bel Air. That'd have probably been the same deal.
Yeah. But 5, I think, is pretty good.
I'm happy with it. Because I expected hardly anybody.
Yeah, I like your students.
Me too. I like how diverse that class is too. I've got a sculptor with Grace. I've got plenty of drafts people. I've got beginning oil painters. I've got Steven, who's a little further along, doing some ambitious stuff.
He comes on Saturdays?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
And I've got some online students. I've got a student from Boston. I've got a student that is kind of nomadic, keeps moving around.
Sounds like Lou.
I haven't had Luke in that class.
No, I meant Lou. Lou, remember Lou?
Oh yeah, Lou. I thought you said Luke.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, Lou used to be in my Saturday class, but I don't think he's around right now.
Yeah, I don't know where he is.
I just made
He
a
gets
mistake.
around a lot.
Yeah, I mean that's cool. You can't do that with young. Well, I guess you can do it with young kids. You just have to have a fairly big budget or a job that travels well.
Right. Yeah, you do have a lot of diversity.
No, that's cool. I like it.
Yeah.
And it's nice that you can incorporate, the fundamentals. You can say, well, this is how this connects to that, which is really neat.
Yeah.
I feel like I just made a mistake. Still felt like that shadow was a little harsh, but now I kind of killed the darkness of it. That's all right. One more little problem solve away. All right, I've got to force myself to stop.
Yeah, I'm gonna sign off. And thank you again, okay?
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, I'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week.
All right, good night.
All right. All right. Well, I've got to call it. It's not perfect. Wasn't intended to be with Alla Prima, but I don't know. 3 hour-ish sitting, or 3.5 hour sitting, with that aspect of Alla Prima being win some, lose some. I think this turned out all right. So hope you enjoyed it. I hope you just enjoyed hearing some of the sort of ideas and thoughts that are going through my head and some of the creative decisions. And I hope you'll join me the next time. Maybe I'll do figure next time, or another animal, or another Alla Prima still life, maybe even a landscape. Who knows? The only one I'd be doing from life would probably just be the still life, but working from reference, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. You can just be a little, I don't know, pre-flattened, not seen with realistic depth like from the eyes. So you just have to make it up a little bit, and you have this sort of static thing, instead of making decisions based on like these slight shifts between your eye level shifting ever so slightly, and maybe the subject is wilting a little bit, or you get all these little fun changes that you can react to. And I prefer working from life big time, but this is fun, and I'm happy to have you. Done. All right. Everyone's still there? Oh, the camera shifted again. Nobody told me. Let's bring that a little square. Okay. Outstanding. That's appreciated time to you. You're welcome, Claude. Happy to have you. And thank you all for joining me. I am going to sign off, but I very much appreciate having you. And I'll be announcing more. And I hope you can join me then too. Again, I might not always stick to one genre or another, but been a blast, and thank you. camera distorts. Ah. Maybe if I turn on this light.